We're on to our very last presentation. This presentation is special because our guest will be zooming in today, Wizard of Oz style, behind us. So without further ado, I would like to welcome you guys to our final presentation with Jared Spool. Jared is a maker of awesomeness at Center. The school he started with Leslie Jensen Inman to create industry-ready user experience designers. During his 43 years in the tech field, he has worked with hundreds of organizations, written 2 books, published a ton of articles, and toured the world speaking to audiences about user experience. He is joining us virtually today, so please welcome Jared. Oh, there you are, Jared Spool.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am excited to be here. I'm excited to be part of this. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but everything is the magic of Zoom allows me to basically give talks all over the world without wearing pants. So it's wonderful. Today, what I thought I would talk to you about is what it means to conduct research in an agile environment. I don't know if that's something that any of y'all find yourselves doing on a regular basis, but a lot of the folks that I talk to are always struggling with this, and so we're gonna talk about what it means to really be able to deliver great user experiences and to do the research necessary to do that, given that we have to work in an agile environment. And so the place I want to start with this is this idea that often in agile, what UX teams try to do is they try and squeeze the research down to very small time frames, right? So I'm going to switch here, and you can see what I'm doing. You're going to find out that the only thing I can draw is blood here, but we'll do our best to see if I can communicate my ideas by sketching them out. And I apologize right now. The font I've chosen for this talk is sans legible. So, but we'll do our best. So we can think of this idea of a sprint, and a sprint is a 2 to 3 week time boxed thing. And it's important to understand sprint is really just a Scrum term, though SAFe also uses it. Other types of Agile use other types of things, but one of the things that's common to all forms of Agile is this idea that we're going to have everything in this time box. So what happens is that people, the people doing the research in a project find out at the beginning of the project what it is, what they're going to be researching, what questions they might be interested in. And then from there, they do their best to try and find a place where they can do some research. And then they take that research and they share their findings. And hopefully there's enough time at the end that the team could actually take the findings and do something with it. Otherwise, the findings end up going into the this thing that everybody refers to as the backlog, which is basically just storing it for the rest of eternity. And so the project, everything has to be sort of shrunk down into this very short time frame. And so user experience activities that used to take weeks or months are now just shoved into this 2 to 3 week time of a sprint. And the question that I get from UX people everywhere is, how do we make sure we do the best quality user research in the time frame of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever the time box time is? And the answer, I'll just spoil it right now. The answer is you can't. It's just not going to happen. So that's pretty much the talk. thank you very much. We can take questions now. No, there's more to talk about. We can say a little bit more, but it's basically, the answer is it's not going to happen. You cannot be able to shrink down the work into this shortened time frame. And so what happens is that we end up cutting corners, right? We figure out ways to reduce the research work to fit this speed, this ability to do things very quickly, very fast in this 2 to 3 week time, because someone's gotten it in their head that agility is about speed, which it's not, by the way. Agility is not about speed. Agility is actually about being able to turn quickly. So that part of the understanding of Agile has just gone off the rails, and it's now just, let's see if we can do everything as quickly as possible. And so what you end up doing is you end up starting to remove the valuable things, because they're the things that take time, and we just keep reducing things, and everything becomes limited to a bunch of simple usability tests. And when we can't even do simple usability tests, we do a particular type of research which has a technical name, which is called guessing. And guessing is basically, we're going to just not do any research whatsoever. We're just going to leave that open and just take our chances that we think we know what's going to work for our users and how it's going to work. And that doesn't usually end well, but that's okay. That's somebody else's problem down the line. So what ends up happening is we end up with user research that's only real purpose is to validate the work, right? And what we don't get is any real understanding of our users. We don't get any knowledge of who the users are, what the users need, what their current experience is like, what their future experience could be like, anything that could truly make the product substantially better, that could help us do any sort of innovation. We don't get the opportunity to do any of that. So what happens is teams try to compensate for this. They try to figure out different ways to try to either do more in that shortened time or extend the time out. For instance, one of the things that's very popular to do is to create this idea of a discovery sprint. And so a discovery sprint is this thing that happens before the project sprint happens. And in this, we try to discover what the users need, what the users want. But these things are typically 2 to 3 weeks also. So again, we're just sort of shoving them into a time box. And the reality is that research does not like being time boxed. It is just not interested in that. So this 2 to 3 weeks discovery sprint, sure, it doubles the amount of time that we get, sorta, but in fact, it only helps us for that first sprint, because we're going to have another sprint, we're going to have another sprint, we're going to have another sprint. Now, some people have tried something else, which is this idea of dual track Agile. This was an idea first put out by Desiree C. and made popular by Jeff Patton and Marty Kagan and a bunch of people who get paid a lot of money to say these things. And basically what they do is they have 2 tracks that happen simultaneously. One track is a design track. The other track is a coding track. And the idea is that you're designing here for things that are going to be coded there, and you just keep that process going. But the problem is that you're still trying to pack research into very small time box sprints. So this just doesn't work very well. It's slightly better, but not much better. You're not going to see the innovation that you could be seeing if you had more research and more time to do what you need. So Instead, what we want to be moving to is something that we call continuous research. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is this idea of how we do continuous research in an agile environment. And continuous research is about always having research happening, that it's just ongoing, that what we're doing in continuous research is we're building up our understanding of who the users are, what they need, what their current experience is like, what their future experience is like. And we're doing that continually. We're just always trying to build on our understanding, on our knowledge of what that can be. And continuous research is looking at basically what's happening now, what is currently working, and what will be worked on in the future. But to achieve this, the biggest thing that gets in our way for doing continuous research turns out to be ourselves, right? We have to have some major changes, some major mindset shifts for us to be able to understand that. And so to understand what we have to do to be able to do this work, we need to understand a bit more about how Agile is supposed to work, what the value Agile actually brings it. Now, a lot of people think that Agile is just about getting things shipped faster. But again, agility is not about speed. Agility is about turning. It's about being able to make quick turns at any point, be able to change direction. And Agile was basically an answer to waterfall. Waterfall was this process where we would upfront, basically, we would start by specifying requirements up front, and then we would design for those requirements once that was done, and then we would code up the system that those requirements were built on, and then we would test that system, and then we would release that system. And the thing about Agile, or the thing about Waterfall, the reason it's called Waterfall is that you had to do this whole step before you could get to this step. And you couldn't go back. You couldn't, requirements were literally cast in stone and they could not be changed. And so if something in the design was either unclear or you learned something along the lines that what you're designing is not the right thing, you could not go back and change it. And then once the design was all done, you started coding. And you could not go back and change the design or the requirements once coding started. And once you stopped coding, you could then start testing. And you couldn't go back and change the code in any substantive way, and therefore then you released. And that's why it was called Waterfall, right? It's just this sort of everything flows downhill. And that could take months, right? We could talk months or years from the time that you first came up with the requirements to the time you had a thing. And the odds of getting the thing that you wanted by the time you got to this endpoint were exceptionally slim. So that was where Agile was born. Agile was born actually on a mountain in Vancouver, Canada, in 2001 by a bunch of skiers who were between their times in the ski slopes getting together and talking about what it would mean to actually not have to deal with the fact that in Waterfall, you're always fighting this ability of trying to actually build what anybody wants to have. And so they proposed this idea that instead of taking months or years to get from requirements to the release and not having what anybody wants, because you don't discover what you need to build until you get into these middle stages, what they what they decided was that they'd like something that was just more flexible, something where, what if we just broke the project into tiny little things, and at the end of each project we basically just we would just take a pulse and say, have we built the right thing? Are we on the right track? And if we're not on the right track, we'll change what we're doing. But if we are on the right track, we'll keep going. And so the idea was we could turn quickly if we needed to turn. They weren't suggesting, the white dudes on the mountain, they weren't suggesting that we were going to get to the end any faster. They were just suggesting that what we would get at the end would actually more likely meet what people needed. And so somehow, after they stopped skiing, this became, well, let's just make everything fit into a sprint. And that's where we get into trouble, is this end of the sprint thing. And so it turns out that there's been a lot of thinking about this, and part of the thinking has been that we need to sort of go back and look at what is it that Agile was really about. And the way they set it up was based on not Scrum, but this other type of Agile called XP, which stands for Extreme Programming. And the idea behind XP was that each of these time-boxed units, they didn't call them sprints, each of these little time-box work periods would have a beginning part where you estimated what you were going to do, and an end part where you went back and checked if you actually got your estimates right. And the idea was that we could better predict when this date was going to happen if we knew general sense as to how long each of these pieces were going to take and what we could get done in each of them. And they named this idea velocity. And the thing about velocity is that velocity is not just speed, which is how people think of it. It's speed plus direction. So the thing is that what we wanted to understand is, we're going to estimate something. We're going to do as much of the work as we can fit into this time, and then we'll see how good we were at estimating. And the key piece of all this is that in order to know if we've succeeded or not, we had to have something defined. And that something that we had to have defined was done. We had to know what it meant. I don't know why there's 3 lines there. Let me try that again. We had to know what it meant to be done, right? What was the definition of done? And this is something they talked about on the mountain. And one of the things that they talked about was done should be working software. If we have software that works, that's done, right? We can give it to someone, they can try it out, we can then get their feedback, and then we can do another thing and see if we can make it better. And that was the idea behind the idea of doing this in these time box units, was to be able to get to something that someone could try and could be done. But here's the thing. Just because software works doesn't mean it's actually good. And there was no definition that included UX in that description. So what this then means is that we need to sort of think about, well, how would we get a UX definition into the definition of done? And the way that we could do that is with something that we call a UX outcome. A UX outcome answers a question. If we do a great job on this thing that we're building, how will we improve someone's life? And this question is really powerful, because when you ask somebody, okay, we're working on this thing, let's say we're working on data export. We're working on data export. If we do a great job on data export, how does that improve somebody's life? Now, I will promise you, the first few times you ask that question, nobody will know the answer because we have been so focused on just figuring out what data export was that we didn't ask how it was going to be used or how it was going to make somebody's life better. But once we get to that answer, now we have a definition of done. Done is not done until we've improved somebody's life. And that helps us tremendously. That helps us now have a clear understanding as to whether or not we have succeeded in this process. However, in order for this to all work, we have to understand how we got to be working on data export in the first place. So the way that we think about how we got to work on this in the first place is that we deal with the fact that it's actually a myth that the project starts here at the beginning of the sprint, because it doesn't start here at the beginning of the sprint. It actually started before this point. You see, there's a moment that happens where someone says, you know what, the next thing this team is going to work on is going to be data export. And this is called rolling off the roadmap. The roadmap is a schedule, right? It's a schedule of what we're going to work on. And basically, the roadmap is just basically, in essence, a list of features, things that we're going to work on. So, you know, right now we're working on this feature, we're working on that feature, we're working on these two features, and so that's now. And then next we're going to work on this feature and that feature as soon as these are done. And what goes into now basically fills up all the resources we have, right? So we make sure everybody's coding. So we just keep putting things into now until we no longer have people who can code anything. And then it starts going into next. And then we have later. Later are the things that we're not sure we're going to do next. In fact, we're pretty sure we're not going to do them next. But we're definitely going to do them eventually. And depending on where they go in later, you know, whether they go sooner or later in later, that depends on the priority of the thing. And this is a tool for product managers to basically say no to something without saying no, because they can basically, somebody says, you know, I really think we should do blockchain. And they're like, why do we need to do blockchain? Well, because everybody's doing blockchain. Okay, we'll just put it down here and we'll not worry about it. I think we should do Chat GPT. Okay, well, we'll put that down here and we're not going to care about it, right? So that's the basic idea, right? So we can shove the things that really we're not excited about down at the very bottom. We can put the stuff that we're most excited about in next, and everything's in between. And the thing about this schedule is this schedule tells us what we're going to be working on. So we know that we're going to be working on data export because data export's living here and next. And at some point, this team is going to have free resources, and we're going to be able to take those free resources and push them out. So that's going to give us some real opportunity here. Well, it turns out that there's another point up here, which is when something gets put on the roadmap. And there's another point up here, which is when something gets considered for the roadmap. So that's before it gets put on, because when it's put on, it's an official thing. And you know, like we show this to customers and we tell them we're working on this so that they don't go and leave us for our competitors. So putting it on the roadmap's a big deal. Consideration for the roadmap is just, you know, maybe we'll put it on. And then rolling off the roadmap is what we do when we then start the project. Well, it turns out there's time in here that we're wasting, where we could be learning about why people wanted this thing. And in fact, there's time in here between when we put it on the roadmap and we roll it off, where we could actually be finding out more things about why this was so important that it should go on the roadmap, and who's going to use it, and how that's going to be valuable. And then there's even time in here between the time it's considered and put on the roadmap to help us figure out if it's even worth putting on the roadmap. And so we can extend our research to understanding what the product is and why we're building it, and not leaving it to this moment at the very beginning of the project to figure out what it is. And this definition of done is extended to the UX outcome, which we can establish up front and figure out what makes the most sense. So basically, what we're talking about here is we're going to take this set of features and we're going to stop referring to them as features. We're not going to refer to this as data export anymore. We're going to refer to this as something that's completely valuable to the user. So we first have to understand what the UX outcome is. What is the thing that if we did a great job on data export, how would it improve someone's life? Well, that brings us to Edna. Edna is the person who actually is going to benefit from data export. Because if we go out and we meet Edna, we can watch what Edna is doing today. Edna goes through all these steps in order to use the data in our product. And she's the one asking for data export because she's the one who is really feeling the pain. And we can measure Edna's experience on a scale of extreme frustration to extreme delight. And what we can see when we talk to Edna is that she goes through this process where she opens up the application and she starts working with it, but then she has to start copying down all the pieces of data that she needs, and she copies them down into a notebook by hand. And then she goes and she types them into the system, and this is extremely frustrating for her. And then she goes over to Excel, and she takes that stuff that she's typed in and she sucks it into Excel, and then she can produce some reports. And it turns out that she's producing reports that have charts in them, and she gives those charts to her senior management so that they can see that last week, between last week and this week, they've made progress. And suddenly, all of these things have we can clearly see what's causing pain for Edna. That if we can give her a way to get this stuff into Excel better, we can make her experience more delightful all the way across. And so we now know that the outcome is that the data exists so she can make charts. And that becomes our outcome for Edna. So this is data to make charts, is what it is. Now, here's the thing. Our product has charts. So why is she putting them in Excel? Is she putting them in Excel because she doesn't know that our product has charts because the navigation is so frustrating that she can't see it? Or that she is she putting them into Excel because she doesn't realize that that the charts that we have are good enough, or she doesn't know how to use them? If we spend time with Edna, if we do the research with Edna, we can actually see what the problem is. And we can see, should we make data export easier, or should we actually just make the charts better? And that's the work that we're doing in research before the sprint starts. That's happening in this time before the sprint starts. And Then we're going to work on the product and we're going to deliver something for her. And either we've achieved the UX outcome or we haven't. And so now we've got this expanded research. We're now doing the research before the sprint starts and after the sprint ends. And that gets us a step to one more thing, which is we've got sprints happening all the time. So here's a sprint, here's a sprint, here's a sprint. We have them happening all the time. And turns out that there's a bunch of things on the roadmap that actually would make Edna's life a little better. This would make Edna's life a little better. This would make Edna's life better. These two things would make Edna's life better. So when we're spending time with Edna and we're actually doing our research with Edna, we can find things that not only we're working on here, but we're also going to work on here and down here. So what we end up doing is we end up building a research process that is just constantly doing research. We call this continuous research. And what we do is we take the roadmap information and we use that to form a research agenda. And that research agenda is basically a compilation of all the questions we have about all the things on the roadmap. And we use the research agenda to tell us that basically what we're trying to do is find out all the information, as much information as we can, about all the projects coming up. Because we're not working on a whole bunch of discrete things. We're actually working on a product that is just evolving and growing, and everything feeds from everything else. So we're constantly studying our users, and we're doing our best to understand. So what this ends up doing is it shifts us from basically doing product research, which is the way we're doing things now. We're shifting that to be doing experience research. We're actually studying the experience of our users, of Edna, of Jake, of Alex, of Anya, right? We're studying them continually. We're growing our expertise. And the goal of continuous research is not to figure out how to make the product incrementally better, but to actually become the world's foremost experts in who our users are, what our users need, what their current experience is like, and what it is like, what it could be like in the future. And instead of this research basically scrambling to do a little thing and then have a discussion of insights which get ignored as they're put on the backlog. So we have these little moments where we just talk about what are our recommendations for fixing this thing so it doesn't suck as much as it's going to. And we just push that out there. We treat this differently. We say, okay, this project's starting a team, so let's dump everything we know and really help this team at the very beginning of their project understand all the things we know about our users, what they need, what they're going to use, have them use all of that. And then what we do from there is we, every time a new project starts, we just keep dumping everything we know. In the meantime, we're growing our understanding of the users and what they need. So every time we dump down to the project what we know, we're giving them more and more insight. And the benefit of all of this is that this continuous research starts to inform the project over time. And we get smarter and better, and everybody on the teams that we're working with are getting smarter and better. They're learning more about the users. They're learning more about how this works. And as a result, they are able to innovate. They're able to move faster. They're able to actually produce better results in the time they have, because they're not starting with that sort of empty beginner's mind at the beginning of every sprint. They're actually building on knowledge that they have over time. And that building on knowledge that they have is absolutely critical for them to truly get better. Agile has stopped us from actually knowing anything about what we're building, because we're always context switching into something new, and we never understand how it connects to anything we've done before. By building out a continuous research capability, we change the game. And the game that we change is that we are in a place now where the people that we are trying to design for are getting what they need. We changed the definition of done to be when we've actually improved somebody's life. We start the research way earlier when we're actually considering things to get put on the roadmap. We learn everything we can about what's on the roadmap, so when it finally rolls off and becomes a real project, we already know who the users are, what they need, what done looks like, how we're going to improve their lives, and how we make things better. Now, to pull this off, we're going to have to do more than just usability testing. We're going to have to do ethnographic research, we're going to have to do strategic research, and we're going to have to focus on making sure that we're actually solving the right problems, not just building the thing right. And so that's how we focus on rethinking Agile, or rethinking research, so that it works in Agile. Instead of doing lots of little research projects squished inside of sprints, we do lots of sprints inside of one big, large research project. And that's the way we solve this problem. So that's what I came to talk to you about. And I think we're going to have a chance to take some questions. So, what questions do we have?
Jared, thank you so much. I'm running up to the stage so you can see me.
Okay, sorry for well, you're sprinting. I guess that's the right thing to say.
Hello. I can only imagine what it feels like for you in that room, talking to the camera with 50 people in the audience that you can't see, glued to the screen, and you are the Wizard of Oz in this room, just staring down at us. And I think there's both delight and concern about just this size of the screen here. But that was great. I didn't think we'd actually get that type of presentation, but I will tell you firsthand that was refreshing to have hand-drawn slides after so many beautifully designed slides by our presenters. But this, to me, was a breath of fresh air. You're like the Bob Ross of UX design sprints. So happy little sprints everywhere. It's a great. I'm finding a wonderful way to cap off a day here of a lot of insights around the process and the methodologies behind design and experience design. Jared, you bring so many great ideas in here. We do have some questions that are coming in. I'm curious. Just going to lead off with my own. Are you familiar with the browser company who's been making Arc? It's a browser platform.
I am familiar with the company. I have not played with Arc yet.
Okay. The only reason I bring them up is I see what you're describing in this methodology as something that they do. I am a user and a subscriber to their newsletter, and you see the research that's driving the way that they're progressing with the product. And my question that leads into this, and maybe you touched on it and I missed it, but I'm curious about the role of communication and involvement of the user in this process. Do you have, you must have thoughts and opinions around the importance and or the means of how you use those to drive this continuous research? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the core of doing this is that you have to think of the participants that you're doing the research with, not in this sort of transactional form that's evolved, where we basically just hire people for an hour, give them an Amazon gift card, and send them on their way. But instead, in this notion that you're building something for them that they are going to be using, ideally for a very long time. And in order to do that, you have to build a relationship with them. You have to understand, because what we really want to do is we want to understand what it's like the first time they use it. We want to understand what it's like the 20th time they use it. We want to understand what it'll be like the 1,000th time we use it. And we want to understand what it might be like the last time they use it. And we want to understand sort of the beginning to end of that life cycle. And so we're going to need relationships with people over a very long period of time. And in order to get those relationships, we're going to want to build community. And that sounds like what the ARC people are doing, is that they're building a community of people who are their users, who are going to help them. But, part of the problem of doing that is eventually the community learns what you're doing, and they learn the language, and it makes it hard for people who aren't part of the community to sort of join in. It's like, going to a party where everybody else at the party has been getting together every month for the last 5 years, and you're the new person, and you don't know anybody, and they're laughing at jokes, and you don't understand the jokes because they're running gags. And so that sort of, how do you bring people into the community? That's a challenge, right? So those types of questions are the things that you have to deal with when you move to this type of research, which is, how do you keep the participant pool fresh and insightful while at the same time nurturing the long-term relationships that you really need for that.
That's great. I've got questions here. I'm not sure if you can see them on that end, Jared, so I'm just going to read them off. The first question is from Daniel, asking, what are some examples of tangible outputs from research as part of continuous research inside of an agile environment?
Like most things, you don't focus on the outputs, right? We don't want to be focusing on the outputs. What we want to focus on is the outcome. And the outcome is, what change do we want to see with the team in order to know that we're doing the right thing? And the change that we want to see with the team is that the team now has all the information they need to be able to deliver something that actually gets the UX outcome for the user, gets the improvement in their life. So we focus on that. And we pay less attention to the list of deliverables that we might use, and instead adapt those deliverables to what the team needs. And so there is no prescriptive notion of, there's a bunch of deliverables here. I mean, it could just be that the members of the team spend time with you getting to know the users. And then they walk away and they code stuff. And you didn't hand them anything per se. In fact, we want to avoid as many handoffs of anything as we can, because handoffs are problematic. So maybe, for instance, I talked about how one of the things we might do is dump the knowledge that we have so far onto the teams. Well, what I mean by that is that what I'm doing here is I'm finding a way to communicate everything I know about this project that's starting up at this point. So for instance, if I have done some research and I met people who were going to be users of this product, whose life we want to improve, I might arrange a special research session to happen right at this juncture, so that the members of this team that are about to start up and start coding can actually start immediately seeing what those users are like, meeting the people who are going to use their product when that sprint is done, and have them meet those folks. So maybe the deliverable is show and tell, an opportunity for people who are using the thing to get together with the people who are building the thing. And that's all the deliverable is. So it's going to depend on what's going to work best for that team in that situation. That's the nature of strategic work. It's always very situationally aware, and not this predefined set of deliverables that will not change despite the fact that everything around it is different.
I like the idea of situational awareness in this context, because it really does. There's not one prescriptive approach here. This is about being aware of the various kind of nuances and addressing them with a mindset, if I'm not
Exactly.
mistaken. Another anonymous question here says, how can you avoid folks who are doing the knowledge gathering, ending up just trying to confirm that their predefined solutions, for example, data export, are correct, rather than gathering context on the user's day-to-day and need?
Well, the way you do this is success is when you've improved someone's life. And you focus on that. And you can tell when you've improved someone's life, they are much happier with you. So if Edna's not any happier at the end of this, then any bias that forced you to produce a solution that didn't make Edna happy failed. I mean, well, I guess it worked if that was the goal. But if the goal is to make Edna happy, it failed. And then under the construct of Agile, you go back and you try again until you succeed. And so by using the improvement to someone's life as the driver of this is when we have done and this is when we've succeeded, we sort of keep ourselves honest because the bias isn't going to get us there. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. I'm seeing nodding heads here that you can't see, so I'm going to assume for the vast majority of people, the answer here we're hearing is your bias will not affect the outcome necessarily. You're judging by the outcome. So if the outcome you're looking for is improvement in life, quality of life, however that is manifest, that's what you're evaluating against as the metric.
Yeah. I mean, one way to think about this is you're running a marathon race, and a marathon race is what, 42 kilometers, right? So you're running this marathon race. You can run 5 kilometers and claim you're done, but if you didn't cross the finish line of the marathon race, you're not done. And there's an objective metric that you can use that says you are only done if you cross the finish line of the marathon race. So you can decide you're done, but you're not done. And so the having that objective metric set up front and having that metric set on the thing that UX people are supposed to be doing, which is improving the lives of all the people who use the product and the service, that keeps us honest.
Having just run a marathon and having to stop at 32 kilometers, it's very powerful metaphor for me and painful.
Sorry, didn't mean to trigger you.
I'm going to get the next frame wrong. I'm sorry in advance. Yi Chen asks, is there some kind of iteration framework for when the research also informs the roadmap, but then the roadmap also informs how the research plan is produced? Something of a snake eating its tail framework that you might be able to share.
Yeah, that's actually a very advanced insight, because what's going to happen over time is as we're getting smarter, we're going to see problems that aren't on the roadmap, that nobody is solving, that our customers are not solving, that our people are not solving. Matthew, I'm just driving you nuts. That's just why I let you know that. Basically, we are going to see new things that nobody expected to see. The technical name for these are latent needs. These are unexpected things that if we solve these problems, none of our competitors are solving them. We will be ahead of the market. And if you ever asked yourself, how do companies like Amazon or Apple or Disney or Netflix come up with things that nobody's ever thought about? It's because they're spending so much time. They're actually looking at what is frustrating people, and they're discovering, hey, here's something we could do that no one's ever done before, and that will make things better. And it's that type of interaction. So what happens then is you can then say, why don't we add this to the roadmap? And because we've discovered it and we know what problem it solves, we actually know how valuable it would be to a customer. And those things tend to get prioritized higher because we want the most valuable stuff at the top of the roadmap. And so if we get good at this, we can get to the point where nothing goes on the roadmap unless we saw it in that process. And here's, you want to know that if that blows your mind, let me tell you the next thing, which is that you could use this for every decision the organization makes, even decisions like what company should we acquire, because if you've spent all this time studying your users, studying your customers, understanding their experiences, understanding what would make their experiences better, then you'll know whether an acquisition will solve major problems for those customers or not. And as a result, you can have, as part of the diligence process, a way to make sure that if you're going to acquire a company because you want their product to work with your product, that is, it's going to either solve a problem you've seen or it's not. And if it doesn't solve a problem, it was a waste of an acquisition. And if it solves a big problem, it's a perfectly great acquisition. And so now we're using what we find in research to work on strategic issues through the organization, not just incrementally improving a product, but in fact defining what the entire ecosystem landscape could be with partners, with acquisitions, with any of these other things. And that changes the game, because now UX research has become strategically important to the organization in a way that it's never been before. Because those companies who give lip service to being customer-centric, to being human-centered, are actually for the first time doing that.
I'm trying to form a succession joke right now about, I wish Logan Roy had some of this, but okay. I'm going to wrap up with one more question here. Well, I'm going to read a question here, and admittedly, only tracking halfway along here, so if you already answered this, feel free to elaborate or just shun me. Sky asks, if we have a research agenda parallel with the agile development process, how will the research findings affect the prioritization for each sprint? Which I feel like you kind of answered, but maybe you can elaborate. And is there a way we could quantify these benefits generated by continuous user research? Which sounds to me like, how do you validate, how do you advocate for something like this within an organization?
Right. So to answer the prioritization process is, ideally, the way that the next part of the project, the next thing that a team is going to work on is chosen, is not somebody reaches into a giant jar, pulls out a sheet of paper and say, okay, we're working on data export now. There's usually some formula that is used. And that formula typically is something that takes the value of what that is to the customer and the business, divides it by the effort that it's going to take to do it. So in other words, you want high value, low effort, and then ideally measures it, multiplies it against some notion of confidence, right? That we have high value, low effort, and we're confident that those estimates of value and effort are correct. And research helps us improve our confidence. And it also allows us to continually assess what the value is, because we can see if something would be really valuable to a customer or if it really wouldn't make a difference. If it's not going to make a difference, we can prevent all those times when we worked on something that seemed like a good idea, but it turned out not to be a good idea and nobody's using it. We can see by mapping what are the problems that people are having, what are the frustrations that they're having, where have we missed their expectations, and see if this thing would actually meet their expectations or ideally exceed their expectations and therefore be something they would find really valuable. And once we know what the scope of that is, what the pieces of that are, it becomes much easier to estimate the effort, because we've used the research to figure out exactly what needs to be in scope and what needs to be out of scope. So we're no longer guessing on that either. And because we're researching many different parts of the experience, we get to see the roadmap out, which means that we can also make estimates about whether doing something architecturally now will benefit a feature in the future because they're related. And so we get all these advantages from the research to feed into the prioritization system. And it's the same prioritization for the research as it is for what sprint does what. We take that and we go further with that. And so the piece that we go further with is that now what we can do is use that as a way to actually create a vision of the future, something that tells us and potentially our customers where we're going and allows us to create this picture of a future where we know everything in the roadmap is leading to this ultimate design, which is going to make us a leader in the marketplace. And that's the process here. I think I answered the first part. I'm not 100% sure I answered the second part.
We'll tell you what. I'm going to shift to one last, because we have one last question here, which is, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are hearing the benefits of what you're proposing and how you propose that these processes be amended in their organization, and probably curious, I love this. I may be facing some sort of barriers in terms of implementing this. So if that's the case, if you're in a design team, you're leading a design team, where are the places you would advise those teams or those team members to start and how to implement? Is it advocacy? Is it setting up pilots? Well, you probably consult on this, I imagine, all the time. What is the first point of entry for a lot of people?
So the first thing that you probably want to do is start talking about UX outcomes. You can insert this into conversations, right? Somebody says, hey, I think what we're going to be working on next is data export. You just immediately come back with, okay, that sounds fantastic. If we do a great job on data export, how's that going to improve someone's life? And if you get an answer, fantastic. If you don't get an answer because nobody knows how it's going to improve someone's life, you start making something up and you say, well, I think it's going to solve somebody's life because it's going to make it easier to get the data into Excel. But we should probably go check that. Can we go talk to the person who asked us to put this on the roadmap and go see what they say and start using the UX outcome as a way to sort of foment a sense of risk, right? If we get the wrong thing, we actually waste our time. We've just wasted all this development time, all this stuff, building something nobody wants. If we can nail down what the improvement to someone's life is, then at least we're working on something that we know they want, and then we can get better at figuring out while we're building it if we're getting closer to what they want. And that's the real secret. So the first thing you have to do is you have to shift the conversation from the definition of done being we've shipped something to the definition of done being we've made somebody's life better, a customer's life, a user's life, possibly somebody's life who doesn't even know the product exists, but because someone else uses the product, their life gets better. And that's the process. That's where you start.
Fantastic. We're out of questions. We're out of time. Jared, thank you so much for this fantastic session. I think a lot of people here writing down furious notes once again. For those of you online, hopefully the same. And of course, this will be available afterwards. So a big round of applause for Jared one more time.